Okay, Hotel family, welcome back to Matthew Daniels TV. I am your host, Matthew Daniels, the greatest scribe alive. First and foremost, I want to apologize for everyone who watches my videos and supports the channel because I haven't posted in quite some time. But what I was doing, I was working on my 17th novel. For those of you who are new to the channel, I call myself the real bookworm because not only do I read a lot, but I'm also an author. And I currently have 17 published books out. So I have been working on my 17th novel that I just published last month, and it's doing really well. It's doing really well, and that is the reason why I was not able to come on and make many videos because I was working. I was working on my craft. So if you guys would give me just 1 second, I'm going to check to make sure that the audio is working. I'm going to make sure that my camera is working. And once I confirm that I can be seen and I can be heard, I'm going to make sure we're going to get into the information. Okay. Okay. Everything seems to be working perfectly. Let me do a quick screen share and verify that my screen share is working. And once I verify that my screen share is working, we're going to get into the information. I got a really good one for you guys today. We're going to be dealing with a lot of history of our ancestors, right? We're going to be dealing with a lot of history from our ancestors, and we're going to be dispelling a few myths, and we're going to be looking into, okay, there we go. Sandra Askew, congratulations, my brother. Hey, I really appreciate it. My latest novel, it's a true crime novel. For anyone who's interested in true crime, it's called Death at the Davison Home, Texas City's Most Infamous Murder. And perhaps at the end of this video, I'll show you guys. So if anybody is into true crime, they can go to Amazon, they can order it, they can check it out. It's about a murder that happened in my hometown, September 19th, 1970. And this murder happened to one of the most prominent families in my area. The Davison family quite literally founded Texas City. Literally founded Texas City. When the Davison family moved here, my hometown was known as Shoal Point. And a man named Frank Davison was a part of the Texas City Improvement Association, which was an organization who purchased the area that I live in now, the city that I live in. This area, they purchased it when it was named Shoal Point, and they changed the name to Texas City, and they proceeded to build the city that I live in today. And Frank Davison's son's wife was murdered in the Davison home in 1970. And this home is now a museum. And the majority of people that live down here in my area, they knew nothing about this. And I sort of brought this to the light. But what I want to do, so I apologize for not making a video in a while, but I was working on my book. Anyway, so y'all see the title. Today, we're going to be reclaiming lost history. And we're going to be talking about the slaves who built Wilmington, North Carolina. Now, don't be confused by that title. Yes, many of our enslaved ancestors built the city of Wilmington, North Carolina, but there were also free blacks, free African Americans, although they weren't known as African Americans at that time. There were free blacks, free quote unquote Negroes, who literally had a hand in building a lot of the ancient major buildings and structures in Wilmington, North Carolina. And so what we're going to be doing, we're going to be looking into that history. We're going to be proving these things with facts. And we're just going to be talking about it, and we're going to be covering several things of historical value, just so we'll know our history. Because if you don't know your history, if you don't know where you've been, where you come from, it's hard to really understand where you're at currently in the present moment and where you're headed, right? And a lot of times we say, or we hear it said, that slaves built this country. This country was built on the backs of blacks, enslaved Africans. They did the work. Now that kind of goes without saying, because we understand the concept of slave labor. If an individual has a slave, they're going to use that slave to do the manual labor and to do the work. So we have that concept in our mind. But what also needs to be understood is that all of our ancestors didn't, quote unquote, pick cotton, right? There were skilled individuals who did jobs such as building and following a blueprint and doing craftsman's type work, the type of work that would be considered trades today, bricklaying, deciding, I don't know, cutting, measuring, etc., etc. Artisans, or what they'll call carpenters, or what they'll call people that make clothes, make shoes, that do things that aren't just manual labor, do things that take a certain level of skill. So sometimes when we look at what our ancestors contributed to this country, the movies would like to make us think that the only thing they did was pick cotton. But that's not true. Our ancestors were actually the skilled laborers who built this country. Also, some of our ancestors, a lot actually, when you think about it, were actually free, while some of our ancestors were actually enslaved. Some of our ancestors were able to vote. They were even able to vote during the time of slavery. And shortly after the Civil War, they were able to hold political positions. And they created thriving communities. Now, an individual can look out now and ask the question, well, what happened to these thriving communities? Where are they today? And a person can reference things like Rosewood, where the quote unquote Black Wall Street was destroyed by a white mob. They saw Black people coming together, creating businesses, creating banks, elevating themselves up to the middle class and higher, becoming very wealthy, becoming very prestigious, getting in roles of political power. And then white mobs moved in and destroyed all of that progress. Well, a little known town, or a little known massacre, took place in Wilmington, North Carolina. During slavery, and shortly after the Civil War, a couple of decades after the Civil War, Wilmington, North Carolina was predominantly Black. Our ancestors owned banks. They ran schools. They performed tasks. They were architects. They were artisans. They were bricklayers. They were blacksmiths. They did everything. And they made money doing so. And what we're going to look at in this video, one of the things that happened is a white mob was organized after the Civil War to destroy the progress of that thriving city, to eliminate the power and influence that the African Americans had in Wilmington, North Carolina, and give it back to the white supremacists. Okay. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at, like I always like to do, we're going to be looking into the North Carolina slave narratives And we're going to be looking into the narrative of a man named Uncle Jackson, who actually lived in North Carolina during the time of slavery. And he's going to explain the history from his perspective. And we're going to look at some historical accounts that validate what he said. Now, before we get into that, I want to play a short clip. I want to play a short clip for you guys. And I hope I don't get striked for this. And I hope they don't mute the video. But I'm gonna try it anyway. Give me just a second. Let me pull this video up. And we're going to watch this short video. It's like 1 minute and 56 minutes long. What ended up happening is they made a documentary about the Wilmington massacre. And I want to start there. We're going to start with the Wilmington massacre. Then we're going to go into the writings of our ancestors, the history from our ancestors' perspective. And we're going to be reclaiming some lost history. So we're going to play this video. I'm going to hope I don't get flagged and hope they don't black me.
There was really no other major.
Hold on. Let me turn it up because I want y'all to be able to hear it good. Let me turn it up. And again, this is a documentary from PBS. So that's why I'm afraid I might get flagged. But, you know, I'm going to just say fair use. But I want you guys to see this.
There was really no other major city in the South like Wilmington. First of all, it had a majority Black population of 56%.
They have the opportunity to compete with whites for well-paying jobs for both skilled and unskilled labor. So we see African Americans working as brick masons, blacksmiths, carpenters.
You have folks who are stevedores working on the docks. You're having the Black leadership that have college degrees.
There was a professional class there of doctors and teachers and lawyers.
You've got the array of hardworking Black folk up and down the class line. It was a real community.
One interesting aspect of Wilmington was that Blacks sold items at the city market downtown alongside whites, and this was highly unusual.
They are operating on terms of equality. White vendors are having to compete with Black vendors for customers. And one of the most prominent Black businessmen in the 1890s was a man by the name of Isham Quick.
My name is Inez Campbell Eason. I am the great-great-granddaughter of Isham Quick. He was born in 1843. At the end of slavery, he sojourned up to North Carolina, ended up in Wilmington. He was a wood and coal dealer at the time. He also chartered a Black-owned bank called the Metropolitan Trust Company.
This was quite significant that African Americans had not only began to acquire large sums of money, but that they were able to invest them in Black banks.
Okay, it's basically going to stop right there because all that was a teaser to a trailer. And if you have a chance, I suggest you look that up. Go to YouTube, just type in Wilmington Massacre of 1898 or Wilmington Riot of 1898, and you're going to come up with several videos, but you're also going to see a very well done documentary that that covers this particular time in history. And so you see what they said. At one point, Wilmington, North Carolina was predominantly Black. And our ancestors did everything in this community. They even owned banks. And this all came to an end with a massacre, really, a political coup, a coup d'etat that we're going to get into as we move forward. So the first thing that I want to do as we get into this, and again, we're going to get into the first-hand account of one of our ancestors, but I'm going to show you guys this. The demographics of Wilmington, North Carolina now, which are the result of that massacre, right? You see where it says the population as of 2020 of white residents is 79,791. And the population of black residents are 18,828. That's like over 2 to 3 times higher for the white residents than the black residents. When we just heard them say that before that massacre took place, that riot took place, blacks were the majority. And I'm going to show you guys that even prior to that, blacks are the ones who built Wilmington, North Carolina. So what they built was taken from them, usurped, and then controlled by someone else. And so we're going to be reclaiming some of that lost history. Now, many of you may not know much about Wilmington, North Carolina. So as always, I want to start with just a few facts from Wikipedia. Look what it says. Wilmington is a port city in New Hanover County, North Carolina, United States, with a population of 115,451 as of the 2020 census. It is the 8th most populous city in the state. The county seat of New Hanover County, it is the principal city of the Wilmington metropolitan area, which includes New Hanover, Brunswick, and Pender counties. As of 2023, the region had an estimated population of 467,337. Now, the thing you got to understand about a port city, when they talk about a port city, they're talking about a city that sits on the water. It has a port that can access the actual city where boats can come in to dock, to unload goods and pick goods up. Now, port cities are important because of trade. If you are going to be bringing in things, especially from another part of the world by boat, you need to have a port where that boat can dock. So port cities are invaluable, and the resources and the riches that can be acquired while living in a port city and running a port city correctly is in infinity. It's an infinite amount of money can be made in a port city, which is one of the reasons I'm sure they had to physically take Wilmington from the hands of our ancestors. Look, Wilmington's residential area lies between the Cape Fear River and the Atlantic Ocean, and the city developed as a commercial port in the colonial era. The colonial era being the time period prior to 1776. Remember, America was formed from 13 colonies. Those 13 colonies became America after 1776. So whenever someone says colonial era, they're talking about the time when we were still the 13 colonies. Look, toward the end of the 19th century being the 1800s. So toward the end of the 19th century, between 1850 and 1900, Wilmington was a majority black, racially integrated, prosperous city, and the largest in North Carolina. It suffered what became known as the Wilmington Massacre in 1898, when white supremacists launched a coup that overthrew the legitimately elected local fusionist government. It resulted in the expulsion of opposition black and white political leaders from the city, destruction of the property and businesses of black citizens, including the city's only black newspaper. And that black newspaper was quite possibly the only black newspaper in the country at the time. And deaths ranging from an estimated 60 to more than 300 people. By 1910, Charlotte overtook Wilmington as North Carolina's largest city. Now, what are they talking about? Now, see, This is why I don't really deal with racism, right? Now, follow me when I say that. I know that there are racist people out there, and I deal with those racist individuals as they need to be dealt with. But what I'm talking about, an individual cannot make me hate all white people or all Mexican people or all non-black people, because I understand that throughout our history in this country, everybody who was non-black was not against us. So when you see right here where it says, I can't highlight it. Hold on. Let me go back. Let me try to zoom in a little bit. Where it says that the coup overthrew the legitimately elected fusionist government. What is a fusionist government? They're calling it the fusionist government because they are saying that one or more things were fused together. There were whites and there were blacks working together in the government. And when the white supremacists launched their coup, yes, they were extremely more violent to the black citizens than to the white citizens, but they treated the white citizens who supported the black citizens just the same. Every white person in Wilmington, North Carolina was not a white supremacist racist. And some of them were treated just like the black citizens were treated. It came to a point to where, imagine if you have a city government where you have blacks in city government and you have whites in city government. And these individuals in city government who were Republicans, let me point that out, they were Republicans who were working to make the city of Wilmington an all-inclusive city. You had the white supremacists come in. They put guns to the heads of the black politicians. They put guns to the heads of the white politicians. And they said, look, all of you need to get out of town and you all need to resign so that they could replace the government with a fully white supremacist government. And then they went on a murder spree, killing upwards of, some historians say, upwards of 300 people. The majority of whom, over 90% of whom, would have been black. And some of them, the individuals that had some type of money and pull and prestige in the city of Wilmington, they ran them off. They told them, they put them on trains and they told them, you have to get out of town and never come back. Because remember, at the time in 1898, around 30 something years after the Civil War, Wilmington was the largest, most prosperous city in North Carolina. And the white supremacists said, we refuse to allow these Negroes who were once our slaves to be in control of the government of the largest city in North Carolina. And so they took it by force. And anybody can look up the Wilmington Massacre in 1898, right? Anybody can look that up. But what's crazy is when you remember, so if white supremacists took the city in 1898, and prior to that, it was a majority black city, even when slavery was taking place. You got to think about it. You could have one person that owns hundreds of slaves. So in certain cities, there were more black people than white people, but the majority of those black people were slaves. So at the end of the Civil War, the population size of Wilmington, it was majority black. Now, the beautiful thing about Wilmington, North Carolina is every black person wasn't a slave. That's another myth that we're going to dispel. We have to reclaim lost history. Every black person that was in this country is not the descendant of a slave. Let's make that clear. And in Wilmington, North Carolina, prior to the Civil War, they had blacks in Wilmington who could vote. They could vote, they could own businesses, and they could make money. These are some of the things that that I'm not going to say that they don't want you to know, but the information is not readily available to everyone. We tend to think about, when we think about voting, we think about Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. I remember growing up hearing about Martin Luther King Jr. and the marches and the civil rights movement, Malcolm X, and et cetera, et cetera. And some kind of way, it had been subliminally put into my mind that prior to 1960, blacks couldn't vote. Now you may be more astute than me. You may have already known that blacks could vote prior to 1960, but I didn't. I was shocked to find out that blacks could vote. I had always heard about Martin Luther King Jr. and the Voting Rights Act. I thought the Voting Rights Act gave black people the ability to vote. I thought we couldn't vote before then. But what I found out is what's more accurate is even during slavery, even when our ancestors were enslaved, free blacks could vote. After the Civil War, free blacks could vote. But what they began to do is they began to try and disenfranchise our people from the political process, because they knew that individuals involved in the political process created the laws that ran the nation. The political process creates the laws that runs our nation. So they began to systematically disenfranchise our people after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction era, and what happened with Martin Luther King Jr., the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. They were fighting against the laws and practices that disenfranchised our people from the ability to vote. You see? Not necessarily saying that we couldn't vote before then, but they put certain stipulations on the person that could vote that they knew our ancestors couldn't meet. It could be something as simple as after slavery, during the Reconstruction period, and the Reconstruction era being when our ancestors was rising to new heights and the white supremacists put us back under subjection. Okay? What they would do are things like, okay, if you can't read and write, you can't vote. Knowing good and goddamn well, it was illegal prior to that for our ancestors to learn how to read and write. So the majority of them that had been voting, they couldn't read and write. So they made laws based on the condition of our people that kept them from voting. Or they would say stuff like, oh, you have to be a landowner, knowing good and well the majority of our people didn't own any land. And those were the ways that they disenfranchised us from the voting process. So in Wilmington, North Carolina, it was no different. So what I want to do is, before I get into the slave narrative of Uncle Jackson, I want to, hold on, let me get out of this. I want to go to an article. We're going to read through this article, and then we're going to see what the ancestor said. Because, matter of fact, I want to prove it before the ancestor actually says it. Now, look. This is an article written by a man named John Staton, July 12th, 2020. On Star News Online, where they are being forced to tell the truth. Now, I want you guys to remember that date, 2020. They're coming out and telling the truth about this. But if we were to read through our ancestors' historical records, the quote unquote slave narratives that I've been bringing to you guys, we would already know a lot of this history. But we don't know about the slave narratives. And that's why I keep putting it out there. But look at that headline. Downtown Wilmington was built by slave labor. How's that being recognized? So now they're admitting that downtown Wilmington, North Carolina, was built by what? Slave labor. And again, I'm going to show you guys it wasn't all slave labor, because there were a lot of free blacks in Wilmington who did craftsman work as well. Sandra Askew says, thank you for sharing this information. You're more than welcome, Queen. Thank you for being interested. Thank you for being interested from the bottom of my heart. I just like putting this stuff on record. So even if people don't watch it now, it will be out in the ethers for all eternity. And maybe someone after I'm dead can even access this information. So look at what it says. Matter of fact, so look, the Bellamy Mansion, that picture that you're seeing right there is something that's called the Bellamy Mansion. That's going to be important as we move further. It has a robust accounting of how it was built by slave labor. The Bellamy Mansion is a plantation. But let's get to the article. Look what they say. Downtown Wilmington has hundreds of buildings that date to before the Civil War. And if they were built before the mid-1860s, chances are good that those buildings were constructed, at least in part, by enslaved blacks. That was pretty much the rule. It was rare indeed for a building before the Civil War to be built in Wilmington without any slave labor, said Tony Rivenbark, executive director of Thalian Hall. Now, Thalian Hall is City Hall. That Thalian Hall is connected to City Hall in Wilmington, North Carolina. But pay attention to the confession. It was rare indeed, he says, for a building before the Civil War to be built in Wilmington without any slave labor. So when they talk about, oh, our ancestors built this country, they're absolutely correct. But it wasn't built by ignorant slaves. See, that's what they want your mind to go to. Yeah, they built it, they were slaves. But somebody, a white man, was standing over them with a whip, telling them, hammer here, hammer there, cut here, cut there, put that here, put that there. No. Even if it was a white man who made the plan, who drew out the blueprints, our ancestors knew how to read a blueprint. They knew how to measure. They knew how to cut. They knew how to do mathematics. You understand what I'm saying? They knew how to hammer. They knew how to nail. They knew how to lay a foundation. They knew how to build. They knew these trades. So an individual may be an architect and they say, you know what? I want the building to look like this. Then they would give it to one of our ancestors and say, okay, I want the book to look like this with this dimension made of these materials. And our ancestors would go to work. Slave labor is not synonymous with ignorant labor. I have a friend who's a plumber right now. Now, my friend who's a plumber, he doesn't decide the job that he goes on. He works for someone. Right now, he's doing some plumbing work, putting in toilets and restrooms, and piping, etc., inside of a school in Galveston, a city about 15 minutes from my hometown. Now, He doesn't decide what type of toilet goes where, when, and how. But somebody will tell him, okay, we need 3 urinals right here, and we need the pipes right here. They come up with the plan, but my friend who has been in this trade for years, he knows what tools to use. He knows how to measure. He knows how to use a level. He knows how to cut. He knows how to install. He goes in and does what they tell him to do. Now, even though my friend isn't contracting the job at the school, he's fully proficient enough to do the work. And how do I know this? Because he does side jobs, and he makes a lot of money doing side jobs at regular people's houses where he is the boss. You get it? So if you know the trade, you know how to be the boss. You may not be the boss, but you know how to be the boss because you know how to do the work. If you drive down the street and you see a group of individuals building a house, a new house on your block, they may not be the owner of the company that's building the house, but I guarantee you, with or without that owner of the company, they can build the house. Our ancestors were no different. Slave labor is not ignorant labor. Remember that. Look what he says. Especially a major building like Thalian Hall, City Hall, which started construction in 1855 and was completed in 1858. Near where the hall sits today, there was a yard, Rivenbark said, where the slaveholders would bring their slaves. Contractors and builders would come to rent them out. Acknowledgement of this dark, troubling fact of American and local history by the people who own or maintain these buildings in the form of signage or other kinds of interpretive material is spotty at best, but perhaps spurred in part by recent Black Lives Matter protests. Recognition of the contributions of enslaved Blacks in helping build downtown Wilmington is on the upswing. So even the City Hall, and we're going to get into this, but even the City Hall in Wilmington was built by slave labor. And not only slave labor, free Blacks. There was a lot of free Blacks in Wilmington. Wilmington was sort of a progressive city. It was a progressive community. And this is going to be important when we go to our slave narrative, where he says, near where the hall sits today, there was a yard where the slaveholders would bring their slaves. Remember that comment. And what you can imagine is like in today's time, right? You may have, you know how people talk about if you drive, you may drive up to Home Depot, and in today's time, you may see a lot of people of Hispanic descent, Mexican, Guatemalans, Venezuelans, etc., etc. Just standing, sitting outside of Lowe's, outside of Home Depot, and people will pull up to buy materials, and they are trying to do a job, and they may hire somebody out. And they may say, hey, I need 3 people to do a job, somebody that know how to build, or somebody know how to lay brick, or somebody know how to lay concrete. They jump on the back of the truck, they drive off, they pay them a certain amount, like a day laborer kind of. Now, I'm not equating them with slavery, but I'm saying it was the exact same thing, and you're gonna see in a second. Whereas today, people try to talk about our people being lazy and shiftless. And they talk about how hard working the Hispanic community is. Oh, you can pull up to a Home Depot and see them out there. We started that. You did? That was our hustle. We would hang out in certain places where the contractors and builders would come and they would hire us out. Not only the slaves, but the free Blacks as well. who knew a trade. That was our hustle. We started that hustle until we started being disenfranchised and boxed out. Look what they say about the Bellamy Mansion. And I'm gonna say this, then I'm gonna go into the bill. The Bellamy Mansion Museum at Market Street and North Fifth Avenue has dealt directly with this history for more than 20 years. Not only did the museum restore its former slave quarters years ago as a way of telling the stories of enslaved people, but the first paragraph on the museum's website about Dr. John Dillard Bellamy moves his family into the house in 1861, mentions that he was one of the largest slave holders in the state of North Carolina. Bellamy had 115 slaves working for him in 3 counties, including 9 at the mansion itself. So we see that in modern times, they are beginning to confess that downtown Wilmington was built by slave labor. Okay? Now look, check this out. Let's go to this. Let's go to this. Bam, that's what I want to go to. So today, we're going to be looking at the North Carolina slave narratives, the memories of a man named Uncle Jack. Uncle Jack was born in Wilmington, North Carolina, and we're going to be looking at his historical count of the area, and we're going to be looking at it in the broader context of what we know now. Okay, so let me zoom in so you can all follow along. Look, memories of Uncle Jackson. I was born in 1851 in the yard where my owner lived next door to the city hall. Pause. Remember what we just read. In the article that was published in 2020, the man said that there was a yard next to City Hall where the blacks would gather and just wait to be hired out by the contractors and the builders. And they would be hired out by the contractors and the builders to go do work. Now, what Uncle Jackson is saying is that was not, would they call that a yard? But that yard was part of a plantation. The man that owned Uncle Jackson, he lived next door to what was currently City Hall, what would become City Hall a few years after his birth. And it was there. So he's right there. That's how he knows so much, because he was right there on the scene to see all of this taking place. That's where he was born. And again, we know that he's telling the truth because it's corroborated by a historian writing in 2020. Look, I remember when they was finishing up the city hall. I also remember the foreman, Mr. James Walker. He was general manager. The overseer was Mr. King. I remember all the bricklayers. They all was colored. All of the bricklayers. We're talking about the building of City Hall. And I'm going to show you how important City Hall in Wilmington, North Carolina is in a second. But all of the bricklayers, they all was colored. The man that plastered the City Hall was named George Price. He plastered it inside. The men that plastered the City Hall outside and put those columns up in the front, their names was Robert Finney and William Finney. They both was colored. Jim Ortiz now was a contractor and builder. He done a lot of work around Wilmington. Yes, they were slaves. Most all the fine work around Wilmington was done by slaves. They call them artisans. None of them could read, but give them any plan and they could follow it to the last line. You see? So prior to that guy writing in 2020, in the early 1900s, Uncle Jackson had already said all of this stuff. But what is City Hall? Let's look at City Hall. So he says that City Hall was built by enslaved individuals, right? That's what he says. So look, check this out. Thalian Hall. Thalian Hall is something that's connected to the back of City Hall, basically. Hold on, let me make sure I got it. Which one I want? Yeah, we'll just look at the wiki for now. But look, it says Stallion Hall is a historic city hall and theater located at Wilmington, New Hanover County, North Carolina. It was built in 1858 after the ancestor was born and is a 2-story, 5-bay stucco brick building with a combination of restrained classical revival and flamboyant late Victorian design. The front facade features a tetra-style Corinthian order portico. The Thalian Hall Center for the Performing Arts hosts professional, regional, and local shows to this day and is one of the most heavily utilized historic theaters in the United States. The building has been under the management of the Thalian Hall Center for the Performing Arts, Inc. since 1963. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1970. It is located in the Wilmington Historic District. Now imagine they say all of this glowing stuff about it, but they don't even tell you who built it. Now I want you guys to look at it. Now, obviously, this is built in like Greek style. You can notice from the columns. When you look at ancient Greek architecture, stuff like the Parthenon, right, where the Greeks had theaters and the Greeks had religious temples, they utilized a lot of columns. Now they got this column structure from ancient Egypt because they have columns in ancient Egypt that are carved in with the metal netta, but they have their own flair to it. So this is the City Hall. What you're looking at right here, which is a part of the Wilmington Historic District, and they are giving all of this praise and accolades without even mentioning the people that built it. You see those 4 pillars, right? You see those 4 pillars, right? Let's zoom in a little bit. Boom, go up these stairs, got these 4 beautiful pillars. You got this, you got the top, you got these designs carved, the windows. Look, City Hall. But what did the ancestor say? And we know the ancestor is telling the truth. Look. The ancestor says the man that plastered the City Hall was named George Price. He plastered it inside. The men that plastered the City Hall outside and put those columns up in the front, their names was Robert Finney and William Finney. They both was colored. So the ancestor is telling us those columns that you see were put up by Robert Finney and William Finney, brothers. May your name live on forever and may your memory never die. And they both were colored. So when we go back to the image, let me zoom out. Those 4 columns, they were erected by quote unquote slave labor. Now again, remember what I told you. Slave labor doesn't equal ignorant labor. You see? So if someone driving down Wilmington, they look at this building and like Sandra Askew says, that's a beautiful building. Yes, it is. Look at the design. Look, it's still standing to this very day. But the plaster, the outer covering, the inside covering, the columns, the measuring of the ground was all done by our ancestors, reclaiming lost history. Look. I want to show y'all something. Look, Thalian Hall, Center for the Performing Arts. Now remember, Thalian Hall is basically connected to City Hall. It's right in the back. Look what they say. They don't say nothing about the ancestors. Look what they say. Since its construction in 1855 to 1858, the City Hall / Thalian Hall building has had the unusual distinction as serving as both the area's political and cultural center. So the political and cultural center of Wilmington, North Carolina was built by our ancestors. Listed on the National Register for Historic Places, Thalian Hall is the only surviving theater designed by John Montague Trimble, one of America's foremost 19th century theater architects. So, okay, we're not going to take anything from John Montague Trimble. He designed it, but he didn't build it. It was built at a time when Wilmington was the largest city in the state. The new building housed the town government, the library, as well as an opera house seating 1,000 people, which was 10% of the population of the time. Wilmington had been a center of theatrical activity since the end of the 18th century. With the building of Thalian Hall, Wilmington became a major stop for national tourists, touring artists. So tourists coming from all over the nation would visit Thalian Hall because of how beautifully constructed it was. Now, while our ancestors didn't design it, our ancestors are the ones who followed the blueprint. They're the ones who did the physical work. That artistry, that craftsmanship. That was our ancestors. So these national touring artists, these artists touring from all over the nation, they were coming to behold something that our ancestors had erected. Renee Vaughn says, love what you do, big dog. I'm locked in, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. That gives me motivation to keep going. Look, during the Civil War, Thalian Hall was in almost constant use as a place of amusement. The theater was under the control of the Fort Thalian Association for the first 2 years of its operation until financial difficulties forced their dissolution. From 1860 until 1936, Thalian Hall was leased by private entrepreneurs who booked in road shows and star attractions. The most famous lessee of the theater was John T. Ford, formerly of Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. He leased Thalian Hall from 1867 to 1871 and changed the name to the Opera House. So what I'm showing you guys is Thalian Hall and City Hall in Wilmington, North Carolina is one of the most prestigious locations. It's even in the historic district of Wilmington, North Carolina, and it was built by our ancestors. But you know what's crazy? Even when I pull up this article, Thalian Hall, Center for the Performing Arts, I read through this whole article. It doesn't tell you that our ancestors built it, right? It don't tell you that our ancestors built it. It don't tell you that. It don't tell you that. Even when I looked at what is called the Wikipedia for Thalian Hall, it doesn't tell you who built it. They tell you the who designed it. They tell you the architecture, the white guy, but they don't tell you that it was built by slave labor because they want you to think that slave labor is picking cotton. No. We didn't just pick cotton. We didn't just pick cotton. We did everything. And the crazy part about it is our ancestors left us records of these things. Remember, look, in 2020, downtown Wilmington was built by slave labor. So not just the city hall. He says downtown Wilmington. When you roll through downtown, it was crafted by our ancestors. If you think it looked beautiful, it was crafted by our ancestors. But let's get back to letting the ancestors speak. He was there. He was born before it was built. And so it's amazing to me that the name George Price, the man that plastered that beautiful city hall, Thalian Hall, is not mentioned on the website. The people who put up the columns, Robert Finney and William Finney, their names aren't mentioned, who put up those 4 beautiful columns. And Jim Ortiz, who was a contractor and builder, who did a lot of work around Wilmington, his name isn't mentioned, right? His name isn't mentioned. But look, he says that, again, yes, they were slaves. Most all the fine work around Wilmington was done by slaves, period. They called them artisans. An artisan, that's someone who knows a trade. No one is telling you what to hammer. No one is telling you what to cut. No one is telling you how to measure. You already know how to measure. And he's going to go into detail of that. Look, none of them could read because it was illegal for our ancestors to read, but give them any plan and they could follow it to the last line. So even with restrictions on their education, they were still able to build edifices that boggle the mind to this very day. Look, the interviewer asked Uncle Jackson, did the owner collect the pay for the labor, Uncle Jackson? Now, I'm finna mess y'all up with this one because he said that they were slaves, right? Now, what do we know about slave labor? Majority of the time, at the end of the year, after Christmas, around January the 1st or a little bit before, people who had slaves who were skilled, they would rent them out for the year. An individual would come and say, hey, this guy knows how to lay brick. I have a lot of work done that I need done coming up this week. I'll pay you X amount of dollars to lease him out for a year. And they would pay that fee to the owner. The individual who was the slave, he would go and work for that contractor for a year and he wouldn't get paid because his owner got paid. So that's why the interviewer is asking, did the owner collect the pay for the labor? So he's basically saying that, okay, when these individuals who were enslaved were building City Hall, did the person that owned these people, did they get the money? Watch this, reclaiming some of our history and dispelling some of the myths. No, ma'am. Again, read the question. Did the owner collect the pay for the labor, Uncle Jackson? No, ma'am. That they didn't. The owner didn't collect the pay for the labor. We had a lot of them artisans amongst our folks. They all lived on our place with their families. They hired themselves where they pleased. They collected their pay, and the onlyest thing the owner took was enough to support their families. They all lived in our yard. It was a great big place, and the women cooked for them and raised the children. So this is another thing where we have to reclaim the history and dispel myths. When we talk about slavery, slavery wasn't a one-size-fits-all. Now, I'm not taking away from the despicable, deplorable, disgusting behavior of the people that owned our ancestors. I would never do that. It will be foolish of me to do that. But I just want to give more historical context so we can see the wide array of experiences that our ancestors lived under, right? So these individuals in Wilmington, remember, I told you prior to that massacre, Wilmington was almost as progressive a place as you could imagine without banning slavery altogether and becoming a free state, or somewhere where individuals could be free. Like if an individual made it to Philadelphia, they were free. They didn't do no slavery. In a lot of places in the North, they abolished slavery a lot faster than the states in the South. That's why the Underground Railroad, our ancestors would try to escape to the North, because in the North, there was no slavery. Well, in certain places in the North, there was no slavery, but the South was bad. So North Carolina is in the South, but they were more progressive than some of the other southern states around them. So some of these ancestors, even though they were enslaved, they were able to make money. This is how some of our ancestors were able to get free as well. They knew a trade. They knew how to do something well. They would get paid to do it, save their money, and then they would pay for their freedom. They would pay their owner, like, okay, how much do you want for my freedom? $1,000. Here's $1,000. I go free. They keep working, save up more money, try to get their wife free, try to get their children free, and eventually try to free their family. So in Wilmington, these craftsmen who were building all of these beautiful structures in Wilmington, North Carolina, in what was known today as the historic district, a lot of them were actually making money doing that. Now, a proceeds of their profits was going to the individual that owned them. Yes, they were still in slavery. We can't downplay that. But they were allowed to make money. So look what he says. They lays a heap of stress on education these days. But education is one thing, and fireside training is another. We had fireside training. Now, what he's talking about is, in today's world, there's a debate about, when your kids are growing up, they're going to high school, they're about to graduate. Should you pay the thousands and thousands of dollars to send them to college to get a quote unquote education and a degree, or put them in a trade school? Let them learn how to be a plumber. Let them learn how to work on elevators. Let them learn how to work with sheet metal. Let them learn how to be a welder. Let them learn how to be a scaffold builder. Let them learn how to be a pipe fitter or bricklayer. Okay, so when this ancestor was talking about education versus fireside training, he's basically talking about getting a degree or learning a trade. That's what he's talking about. So he's saying nowadays, after the Civil War, this is in the early 1900s when this interview is being taken. He's basically saying that in those days, around 1920, 1930, everybody's stressing education. Go to school and get your education. Go to school, get your education. Go to school, get your education. But he's saying there's a difference between education and fireside training, learning on the job, getting a trade, being able to work with your hands. One of our ancestors who understood this was the great Booker T. Washington, one of my all-time favorites. Booker T. Washington with the Tuskegee Institute. He didn't focus on degree work, right? He focused on our ancestors learning how to do things with their hands, trades. And honestly, us getting away from learning trades is one thing that put us in the situation that we're in right now today. Like, one of the biggest, not really a debate, one of the biggest conversation topics right now with this whole Trump MAGA movement, the immigration and deportation and all of that. People keep saying, well, these immigrants are doing jobs that Americans don't want to do. And you have some people coming out saying that's a lie. I would love to do those jobs. Even with the black community is coming out saying, no, you're allowed. We would love to do those jobs. We would love to work in those farms. We would love to build houses. We would love to cut grass. We would love to lay bricks. We would love to build these highways and add more lanes to a highway. We would love to do these construction jobs. We would love to work in these refineries. You see? But what happened was, at some point, the African American began to put more emphasis on education than the trade or the fireside training. And when the education didn't secure jobs, or the individuals who were told to try to get an education failed, dropped out, didn't graduate, didn't get the degree, they had nothing to fall back on. And so it's individuals now who, if they knew how to build a house, they would, but they don't know. If they knew how to be a plumber, they would, but they don't know. If they knew how to lay brick, they would, but they don't know. If they knew how to make clothes, they would. If they knew how to farm, they would, but they don't know. They were fed into a system of education, which is a good thing. I don't knock education. But that whole going to school, get your diploma, go to college, get your degree, be a doctor, be a lawyer, that's not for everybody. That's not for everybody. And so now, when we shun the grunge work, they started importing in more and more immigrants who didn't have a problem with the grunge work, because they were coming from an area of the world where they weren't able to get an education anyway. The majority of people that they see are doing grunge work and getting paid pennies for it. They're like, oh, I can go to America and I can do the same thing, and I can make 3 times what I'm making in Mexico. I can make 3 times what I'm making in Guatemala. I can make 3 times what I'm making in Venezuela. So I'm going to just go to America and I'm going to do this exact same thing, and I'm going to make enough to provide for my family. Where the black man and woman were looking at the white man and woman and saying, hey, I want to be able to make what they making. It ain't enough that I'm making what I'm making. I want to make what they making. We always wanted to be included. We always wanted to be on the same level as the white man and the white woman, which is kind of understandable coming out of slavery. But it put us in the position that we're in now, to where, majority of our people, they don't know how to do nothing. They just don't. Now, a lot of us do, but, I don't have to explain that. Anybody that's realistic, y'all understand exactly what I'm saying. You see, I have a friend, right? I used to be a general manager for McDonald's. And I have a friend, he was a general manager for McDonald's with me. We worked for the same company. I ran one store, he ran another store. We even flew out to Chicago together to get some training. And so his store was close to mine. We worked for the same people. So we would talk on the phone regularly, like about, ideas about how to get our numbers up, how to sell this, how to roll out this promotion. What are you doing when you encounter this problem? What are you doing when you encounter that problem? So he became a friend. Come to find out, he was illegal. He was illegal, and he was actually from Guatemala. He got pulled over one day, driving around drunk. They found out that he was illegal. He didn't have no papers. Boom. They deported him. When he got deported, nowadays you have social media. So although I couldn't talk to him on the phone, we found each other on Facebook. And so I'm still in America. I'm still a general manager in America for McDonald's. He's back in Guatemala, and he's telling me, man, when he started telling me how much they get paid at the McDonald's in Guatemala, because they have a McDonald's, I was like, damn, that's all they paying, but over here they paying this. And even his head knowledge, like, get this, he was a general manager of McDonald's in America, got deported back to Guatemala. He had all the certification that he needed, But they didn't say, oh, we're going to make you a manager. We're going to make you a general manager because, no, we're going to put you on the fries. We're going to put you on the grill. You're going to make this bare minimum, pennies on the dollar. I'm talking about the amount. I don't remember it to this day exactly how much he was being paid. But how much he was being paid in a day was damn near what I was getting paid in like an hour or 2 hours. You see? So an individual can come from a situation and be like, hey, what I make in a day, I can make in an hour if I make it over there to America. So the education versus the fireside training. Now, look, hold on just a second, family. I got to use the bathroom. But instead of just leaving y'all with dead air, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to go back to that video for people that just stepped in. I'm going to show y'all
Really know.
So y'all can kind of understand what we're talking about. Now, they did a documentary about Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm going to play this short video clip, and I'll be back in just a second. You guys hold tight.
There was really no other major city in the South like Wilmington. First of all, it had a majority Black population of 56%.
They have the opportunity to compete with whites for well-paying jobs for both skilled and unskilled labor. So we see African Americans working as brick masons, blacksmiths, carpenters.
You have folks who are stevedores working on the docks. You're having the and down the class line. It was a real community.
One interesting aspect of Wilmington was that Blacks sold items at the city market downtown alongside whites, and this was highly unusual.
They are operating on terms of equality. White vendors are having to compete with Black vendors for customers. And one of the most prominent Black businessmen in the 1890s was a man by the name of Isham Quick.
My name is Inez Campbell Eason. I am the great-great-granddaughter of Isham Quick. He was born in 1843. At the end of slavery, he sojourned up to North Carolina, ended up in Wilmington. He was a wood and coal dealer at the time. He also chartered a Black-owned bank called the Metropolitan Trust Company.
This was quite significant that African Americans had not only began to acquire large sums of money, but that they were able to invest them in Black banks.
Okay. Hold on. I'm back. I just wanted that to finish up. So yeah, you're at banks, teachers, doctors, lawyers. We did it all in Wilmington. So let's go back to what the ancestor has to say. Let's look at some of this historical record. Let's see what Wilmington was like before the white supremacists took it over by force. The ancestor says, we went to church regular. All our people marched behind our owners and sat up in the galley of the white folks' church. Now, them that went to St. James Church behind their white folks didn't dare look at nobody else. It wasn't allowed. They were taught they were better than anybody else. That was called the Silk Stocking Church. Nobody else was fitting to look at. Now that church, actually, you know what I'm gonna show you guys? That church still stands. The St. James Church. This is it right here. Now, of course, certain aspects of it have probably been rebuilt and added on to over the years. But the St. James Church that the ancestor is talking about is right here in front of your face. And that church, like the other stuff in the historic district, was built by slaves and free Blacks. It was built by our ancestors. That's who built these things. Look at that. Look at that building. Slave labor isn't ignorant labor. There's nobody standing over you saying hammer here, hammer there, cut here, cut there. Our ancestors knew how to read blueprints. They knew how to build. They knew how to cut. They knew how to lay brick. They knew how to make cement. They just knew these things. That's why after the end of the Civil War, when our ancestors gained their freedom, they were able to flourish because they knew how to do everything in society. They could do anything for themselves. If they needed a new house, they could just go out and build it. Before there were, nowadays, if you want to build a house, there's all kind of permits you got to get. There's all kind of permission you got to get. You got to go to the city. You got to get the land surveyor. It got to meet this standard. Got to meet that standard. You got to get the inspector to come out, the electrician to come out. That stuff didn't exist back then. I'm just telling you, that stuff didn't exist back then. A lot of what our ancestors did, and my ancestors did this in the area that I'm at right now. They would take it one at a time. Okay, we got 3 or 4 families. Everybody, every man need a house. All right, Matthew Daniels, we're gonna build your house first. Everybody in the family will come together. They will build my house. Once my house was built, my family was moved in. Then maybe my brother. Okay, where are you gonna build your house at? How do you want it? We build my brother's house. Then we build our cousin's house. Then we build our other brother house. Then we build our other cousin house, and we will build up communities from the ground up with our own hands because we knew how to do it. You see? And to break all of that up, they start coming with, you need permits, you need permission, you need to go to the city government. But when they start telling us that we had to go to the city government, it was because they had already usurped the city government. See, a lot of what you see in the Black communities today is by design. But I'm not giving the Black community a pass because you fell for the you went for the cheese in the trap. You see, if an individual got a rat problem and they set out a mouse trap and put cheese on it, and somebody go out there and a rat go out there, they bite the cheese and boom, it snap, break their neck, they die. They're going to remove that rat, they're going to remove that rat, set up that same rat trap, put the cheese on the trap, another rat come out there, go for the cheese, snap his neck. They toss him in the garbage, reset the trap, put the cheese on the trap. Another rat come out, go for the cheese, snap his neck. Now, I've been in situations where I've lived in rat-infested apartments. Ain't no shame in my game. Life, it is in 100 years we'll all be dead. I don't have time to be ashamed. My life is my life. I've lived in some rundown apartments to where in the walls they were infested by mice. Not my apartment. They lived in the walls. They went from apartment to apartment. And in the bathroom, in the kitchen, you could open up the pantry doors and you could see like where they gnawed through a little hole. They gnawed a hole in the wall, and you could see where they could run in and out and go back in the walls. And so what we learned was we would buy mouse traps and we would set the mouse trap up right there by the hole. So when they came into our apartment, they would smell and see the cheese or peanut butter. Peanut butter is good too. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Some of you, you never had to deal with it. You don't get it. We'll put peanut butter on the trap and they'll come out and then bam, they'll get snapped. And I remember days as a teenager sitting with my brother in the apartment. We'll hear a rat trap go out, pop. And then we'll get up and we'll go check each place that we set a mouse trap. When we find the mouse, we'll grab him by his tail, take him out the mouse trap, throw him out the window, reset the trap. In one day, I caught 14. We caught 14 mice in one day like that. And so at some point, being a human, Homo sapiens sapien, thinking man, Homo sapiens sapien means thinking man, thinking man, a man, organism that can think on a higher level than the other animals, than the other organisms. Once you are able to think, once you perfect pattern recognition, there's really no more excuse. Once you see 3 or 4 people get caught in the mouse trap, if you get caught in the mouse trap, it's bam, damn, it's just your own fault at some point. And it's like, yeah, I feel bad for you because somebody else set up the trap, but why did you go for the cheese? So some of the conditions in our neighborhood, yes, this is how they were set up, but we don't have to keep going for the cheese. Stop going for the cheese. We got to do better. And one of the only ways I think that we'll be able to do better is if we understand where we're coming from and where we've been, right? So let's go back to what the ancestor was saying. Let's get back to the documentation. Okay, we read that one. Look, he says, okay, we did the church. Look, he says, my mother was the laundress for the white folks. She washed the clothes. In those days, ladies wore clothes and plenty of them. Stop right there. In those days, ladies wore clothes and plenty of them. If he has to explain that in those days, the times of slavery, ladies wore clothes and plenty of them, he's juxtaposing that against the current time that he's living in, when women are not wearing a lot of clothes, revealing themselves. I'm gonna let y'all do with that what y'all will. My daddy was one of the part Indian folks. My mammy was brought here from Washington City, and when her owner went back home, he sold her to my folks. Around Washington and up that way, they was Guyanese niggas. And that's what my mammy was. We had a lot of these mulatto Negroes around here. They was called Shuffertonis. They was free issues and part Indian. The leader of them was James Sampson. Let's stop right there for just a second. Check this out. My daddy was one of the part Indian folks. Now, if any of you are like me, I watch a lot of different YouTube channels online, and I'm in certain communities. There's a big debate about who the quote-unquote African American is. Some people say we Israelites. Some people say we Moors. Some people say we West Africans. And some people say we're indigenous. And truth be told, we may be a mix of all of those, right? May just be a mix of all of those. But look what he says. My daddy was one of the part Indian folks. Now, zoom out and understand something, right? Understand something right now. When he made that statement in around 1930, they understood who was Indian and who was not. For him to say my daddy was part Indian, that means he knows who the Indians are. He knows who the indigenous people are. He knows who the natives are. And he's confessing that the natives, the Indians, the indigenous people have mixed in with the Africans. And he goes on to say that his mother came from Washington City, and in Washington City that there was a lot of people from Guyana. Now, Guinea or Guyana, that's in West Africa. So they not only understood the difference between West Africa and indigenous, but not only did they understand West Africa, they understood specific spots in West Africa. Hold on, let me go to this real quick. Look, this is a simplistic map that I wanted to pull up. Okay, now we see. I'm gonna zoom in on it real quick, then I'm gonna zoom out, just so you know where I'm at. Y'all see, boom, right there in the middle of the screen, Guinea, Guyana, however you want to pronounce it. So he said that that's where his mother was from, and a lot of the individuals in Washington City were from. So not only did he know that they was from West Africa, but the city that they were from. Now, that doesn't mean that they were native to that area, because a lot of our ancestors were captured in Central Africa and they were brought to the coast and sold. So they could have just been sold on the Guinea coast and not necessarily native to the quote unquote country that we now know as Guinea. They could have been captured in what we now know as Burkina Faso or Mali or Niger or Ghana. They could have been captured anywhere and just put on a boat there. And so when they were brought to America, they were called Guinea, because that's where the boat picked them up from. But what I'm trying to illustrate is that our ancestors understood the difference between an Indian and a West African. You understand what I'm saying? They understood the difference between an indigenous person and a person from West Africa. They knew. See, we always talk about how our identity was stripped from us, and it was. We don't know to this very day. But at certain points in our history, they knew where they came from. Okay? But look what he goes on to say. We had a lot of these mulatto Negroes around here. They was called Shuffer Tonys. They was free issues and part Indian. So he's talking about a mulatto. Now, I have a mulatto in my family from Alabama, and he's saying that these mulattoes in Wilmington, North Carolina, they was free issue and part Indian. They were mixed. Now, what is a free issue? What is he talking about? He's talking about the free blacks. Blacks that were free. During everybody black wasn't a slave during slavery. Let's just rip that band-aid off. Some of us were free. Some of us are descendants from individuals that were free, either born free or bought their freedom from a free community, whatever. But before the Civil War, there were free blacks who were voting, owning property, and owning slaves. You don't want to hear it, owning slaves and everything else. Some of them were malicious slave owners, and some of them owned slaves as a means of, okay, I'll own you because you have to be owned. I'll own you and treat you right, as opposed to letting somebody vicious own you. Look, he says the leader of them, of these mulattoes, these Suffer Tonys, the leader of them was James Sampson. James, check out that name, James Sampson. That was the leader of the free Negroes, the mulattoes. Now look, check this out. Check this out. We finna look at something. James Sampson. Now, James Sampson, the man that the ancestor just referenced, was born in 1806 and he died in 1861 at the very beginning of the Civil War. So the ancestor is talking about a man that lived before freedom came, but he was the leader of the free Negroes. So look what it says. James Sampson was a Wilmington carpenter, so he was one of those skilled people, born into slavery and manumitted as a young man, who became one of the wealthiest free people of color in antebellum North Carolina. He and his children became prominent citizens in Wilmington and elsewhere. No known buildings are credited to him or his workshop. So an individual, when it says manumitted, that means they gained their freedom. Despite his prominence and that of his family, there is little documentation of his early life beyond family tradition. The best known account of James Sampson's background appears in an article by James B. Browning in the Negro History Bulletin of January 1940, which related stories Browning gathered from Sampson's descendants, few of which can be corroborated or denied by known records. Browning described Samson as the son of a slave, as the son and slave of a rich planter in Sampson County. When James was about 18, reported Browning, in 1819, his father took him to Wilmington and found a suitable location, set him up as a carpenter. James had been well trained in this work and liberated him. Over time, the planter brought his son, several slave boys, to be trained and instructed by James, whom he told, "Do for them what I have done for you." Browning stated, "The record of the family shows that James followed minutely the injunction of his father, for he treated the young men as though they were apprentices rather than slaves, and trained them so well that he produced a number of efficient carpenters by the name of Samson." Browning reported that despite laws against it, James Samson taught his slaves and other youths how to read and write, as well as instructing them in religion, and he served as a minister who preached primarily to slave audiences. Among the men James D. Samson may have trained was Henry D. Samson, the house carpenter who became a leading churchman at St. Mark's Episcopal Church after the war. So the individual that they're talking about, James Samson, that the ancestor just mentioned, he was indeed a leader. Now, he was born a slave. He was able to gain his freedom, and his father taught him the craft of a carpenter. And so he created something like a guild. He trained other young men under him in the ways of the carpenter. And he also snuck and taught them how to read and write, because it was illegal to teach a black man, a slave, how to read and write. That was illegal. But James Samson did it anyway. And he was ordained a minister, and he preached to various slaves' audiences. And so this is how he gained the status of a leader of a community of the free blacks, right? Or the free Negroes, the free African Americans in Wilmington. Remember, Wilmington was a mixture of whites and blacks, whites who supported blacks, blacks who were slaves, and blacks who were free. It was one of the most progressive cities in the South. Now, when it talks about how wealthy this ex-slave James Samson became, I want to show you guys exactly how wealthy he was. Check this out, and I'm going to highlight this a little bit so you can follow me. Look at this highlighted part. It says, "Thus far, no record has been located of when exactly James Samson obtained his freedom. In the 1850 census, 1850, prior, that's like 10, 11 years before the Civil War, so slavery is still going on. In the 1850 census, the first to name all free people, he was listed as a 44-year-old mulatto carpenter with $14,000 worth of real estate, and the owner of 7 slaves, including 5 men of working age." Now, $14,000 to an individual in 2025, that's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money, right? But how much is $14,000 in 1850? How much money did this mulatto have? And remember, this 44-year-old mulatto, the ancestor just told us that a mulatto was a free Negro that had some kind of Indian mix. The natives and the Negroes mixed. A lot of us are mixed. There's no argument about whether we're from West Africa or whether we're indigenous. A lot of us have genetic ties to both. Whether you take a DNA test and it tell you that or not, the historical record of our ancestors tells us this. And he was a slave owner, but he wasn't a ruthless slave owner. He wasn't ruthless. He taught them how to read and write. He was teaching them a craft. They were more indentured servants than slaves under James Sampson. But in 1850, if you had $14,000, how much would that equate to in today's economy? Well, I looked it up for you. Family. The value of $14,000 from 1850 to 2025 is $576,000. $576,988.46. So this man, who was born a slave and was manumitted and became a carpenter, created a guild, he had $500,000 in 1850. $500,000. How many people watching this video got access to $500,000? Let's just be real with ourselves. I don't. $500,000, you want it. You want it. So in 1860, before the Civil War took place, there was a black man running around Wilmington, North Carolina, with over $500,000 to his name. You see? Over $500,000. Sometimes we just have to rethink. We have to rethink what we think we know. Real talk. We got to rethink what we think we know. We don't know what we think we know. Look, we children was told to play in our yard, our own yard, and not have nothing to do with the free issue children. Free issue is free blacks. Have nothing to do with free issue children or the common children across the street, white or colored, because they wasn't fitting to associate with us. Yeah, wish I had it. Me too. Now, for real, I wish I was that successful. I'm in 2025. I have all of the freedoms. We got all of the freedoms that they say we have. I wish I was able to amass that kind of wealth. But you see what the ancestor Uncle Jackson says? He says that they were told to play in their own yard and not have anything to do with the free issue children or the common children across the street, white or colored. Why is that? Because they implemented laws, right, to where it was illegal for free blacks to try to not necessarily just interact, but to teach enslaved blacks. Why did they do that? Because one of the reasons slavery lasted so long and it was so effective is because they controlled the flow of information into the reality of the slave. They would, let's say you give birth to a child. You take that child from the mother, boom, you send it somewhere 1,000 miles away. That child grows up. Everything that child is told about the world is you were born to be a slave. You were born to work for honor, respect, never question the master. And because of the inhumane treatment of the adults on the plantation that the baby has found himself in proximity of, they will teach that child too. You don't ever talk back to master. You don't look master in his eyes. You don't, whatever master say do, you need to do, or you're going to get beat, you're going to get killed, and nobody can help you or save you. And so that child grows up and they're taught that this is how the world is. Now, The only way to break that is if you put a different reality into the mind of that slave to where, you know what, this isn't how the world is. This is how the world is supposed to be. So they didn't want the enslaved blacks associating with the free blacks too much, because the enslaved blacks may begin to want to be free. Right? Ray Vaughn says this played a huge physiological role on the way we see things today. Exactly. Some of the ways we see the world today, whether we know it or not, accept it or not, admit it or not, have been passed down epigenetically from our ancestors. It's been passed down epigenetically from our ancestors. That's why it's so easy to abuse, kill, mistreat, disrespect one of our own than someone else. It's so easy to do it. You could be walking down the street, you could pass by someone that's black and you could pass by someone that's white, and just epigenetically, something in the back of your cerebral cortex, you may look at the black person a little more and you think, hey, you better not try me. But then you look at the white person and you think, if I do something to them, I'm gonna go to jail. Or if I do something to them, I can't get away with it. But you look at the black person and, I'll break your nose, I'll break your face, I'll kill you. And it's like something implanted in a majority of our brains that we feel like we can harm each other with impunity. But naturally, if we harm somebody that's white, we will be punished, and we will be punished extremely. I'm going to show you, even with, watch this. When people watch videos, I want you guys to think about this next time you're online, and you see a video of a white person cussing out the cops, and the cops don't beat the shit out of them. They are patient. They ask them to calm down. They do everything that they can do to de-escalate the situation. When the cops are encountering somebody white. Now I want you to go to the comments. The comments are going to show you the psychological mind fuck, part of my language, that are on the people, blacks and whites. You go to the comments. The first few comments you're going to say is, oh, if he was black, it would have went a different way. If he was brown, they would have shot him. Oh, if he wasn't white, that wouldn't have went like that. White privilege. Or if he was black, they would have beat him. If he was black, they would have tased him. They watched the video of a white guy cussing out the cops, and the cops don't beat him. And that switch goes off in their mind, and then they know. In the comments, they respond in the comments by the programming. They say what they are programmed to believe. Oh, if he was black, he would have been shot. That lets you know that in their own mind, they believe that white people can do stuff that they can't do. You can do stuff to black people that you can't do to white people. So epigenetically, that has been passed down. And not just epigenetically, it's with what they feed us in the media. Sometimes white people get shot by cops. They get beat by cops. They get tased by cops, right? But what they're going to feed you is it happening to the black person, because they want to impress upon your mind, don't you dare try to stand up for yourself, because this is what's going to happen. They manipulate what they show you. You feel me? They manipulate what they show you to control your mind. And it's not just controlling your mind, because unfortunately, it is a reality. A lot of those cops are white supremacists. It is what it is. And they will hurt you before they hurt one of their own. Just the facts. But like I say, all of that is like is something psychological. Read the comments next time you see one of those videos and think about what I just said. Read the comments And think about what I just said. Watch how people confess what they believe in their heart. Oh, it couldn't have been a black person. Oh, if they was black, they would be dead. And so that lets me know that if you're ever in a situation with the police like that, you better not act like that, because they'll kill you dead. You see, they'll kill you dead. And it's been like that for years. But anyway, they had laws. What Uncle Jackson is referring to is they had laws on the books that tried to prevent the enslaved blacks from mingling too much with the free blacks, because they didn't want to get ideas of freedom in their head. Look what it says. You see, our owners was rich folks. And we know that his owners was rich folks. They was right next to City Hall. Our big house is the one where the ladies of cirrhosis has their clubhouse, and our yard spread all around there, and our house servants and some of the best artisans in Wilmington lived in our yard. So he was at the epicenter of the skilled craftsmen. Now, this ladies of cirrhosis that he's talking about, I'm gonna show you guys this, because I like to highlight the historical reliability of what our ancestors has to say. Look at that picture on your left. They have a historical marker put up in North Carolina. Look, North Carolina cirrhosis, oldest federated women's club in state, chartered 1896, organized in-house 6.5 miles southeast. Now, what did the ancestors say? The ancestors say, our big house is the one where the ladies of cirrhosis, he pronounced it cirrhosis, but it's cirrhosis, has their club house. So the ladies of cirrhosis has their club's house in the big house of the plantation that he lives at. Look again. Oldest federated women's club in state, chartered 1896, organized in-house. Organized in-house. What house? The house that the ancestor just told you about. But what the hell is the ladies of cirrhosis over there? Check this out. As a part of a nationwide club building movement, North Carolina Cirrhosis, a women's club devoted to the members' personal improvement, as well as providing the social and domestic betterment of Wilmington, was established. The group's beginnings date to 1895, when a group of women formed the club in their homes, met regularly, and planned betterment projects. One of their first steps was to associate themselves with the established clubs in other states. The group chose their name Cirrhosis after a New York club, since it had an appealing sound and is Greek for cluster of flowers. As part of its formal organization, North Carolina Cirrhosis joined the General Federation of Women Clubs in 1896. So again, we can emphatically validate what the ancestor is talking about and prove that it's true. And like I say, I do things like that to show the historical reliability of the slave narratives. You know, the ladies of cirrhosis, they had their clubhouse at the house that was the quote unquote big house that this individual, Uncle Jackson, was enslaved by. All facts. All facts. Look what he says. You know, I'm not telling you things what have been told me, but I'm telling you things I know. He like, I'm not telling this. Nobody told me this. This is what I know. This is what I saw in my own lives. This is what I experienced. This is what I seen. This is what I heard. This is what I know. There's a difference between knowledge and belief. He goes on to say, I remember when the Zoabs company came from Georgia here to Wilmington, and they had all ladies as officers. Now, you see that little asterisk next to officers, meaning the interviewer put in a note. So let's scroll to the bottom and let's look at this note. The note that the interviewer said was, have not been able to verify this memory and think perhaps the unusual uniforms of the Zouaves caused the small boy to think they were women, or some adult may have amused themselves by telling him so. Now, yes, he may be incorrect about the Zouaves having all ladies as officers, but everything else that he said so far is factual. So he definitely could have seen lady officers. See, what I think the interviewer is doing, the interviewer is assuming that he's saying everybody that was a Zouave was a lady. That's not what he said. He said, I remember when the Zouaves company came from Georgia here to Wilmington, and they had all ladies as officers, a certain particular rank. And then the interviewer want to say, oh, I haven't been able to corroborate this. Maybe he's just mistaken. No, maybe he's absolutely correct, like he was with everything else. The city hall, the artisans who put up the columns at the city hall, the ladies of cirrhosis, maybe he's absolutely correct. Maybe the officers were ladies. You understand what I'm saying? So the interviewer, I believe the ancestor. I don't believe the goddamn interviewer. You don't know what you're talking about. I believe the ancestor. But even with that, let me see if I think I pulled something up about that. I took it off. Let me pull it back up. What that is, right? What he's talking about is an army regiment. Okay, he's talking about an army regiment. Now, it's spelled a little wrong in the slave narrative because of how he pronounced it. In the slave narratives, they write stuff how it was pronounced. But what he's talking about when he says, let me show you one more time what he said. And then I'm going to show you the historical context. We don't believe you, interviewer. We believe the ancestor. I remember when the Zouaves, this is what he says, the Zouaves company came from Georgia here to Wilmington, and they had all ladies as officers. So the question becomes, what the hell is the Zouaves? And what does the Zouave company, what are they doing coming from Georgia to Wilmington? What the hell is he talking about? You never heard that term before, have you? No, because I never heard it before I read the slave narrative. So what he's pronouncing is this word right here, the Zouave. The Zouave, he's putting a B in there. It's kind of like Ebonics. You know, English is not his native tongue. Look, the Zouaves were a class of light infantry regiments of the French army and other units modeled on it, which served between 1830 and 1962 and served in French North Africa. The Zouaves were among the most decorated units of the French army. So wait a minute. You got a unit of light infantry regiments of a French army who served in French North Africa and were part of the French army. Why would someone enslaved in Wilmington, North Carolina, be talking about a French, the light infantry regiment of the French army? Look, let's zoom in. This is an image of one of the infantrymen. Now, a person may look at that and be like, I can't mistake that for a woman. But remember, the ancestors said the officers were women, not the everyday Joe Schmo carrying a gun. But why would an infantry from North Africa be in Wilmington, North Carolina? And even more so, how would the ancestor know about him? Look, check this out. Look this. In the United States, I'm right here, family. We validating what the ancestor said. We reestablishing and reclaiming lost history. Right here. I ain't going to leave it highlighted because it may be hard to read. Well, I will. Look, he says, in the United States, Zoaves were brought to public attention by Elmer E. Ellsworth, who created and ran a drill company called the Zoave Cadets. The drill company toured nationally. Zoave units were then raised on both sides of the American Civil War of 1861 to 1865, including a regiment under Ellsworth's command, the 11th New York Infantry, the New York Fire Zoave. Bam. That's the connection between the Zoaves, a French army fighting in North Africa, and the United States during the time of the American Civil War. Now, North Carolina played a major part in the American Civil War. And so this is how the ancestor became aware of them. Again, proving his information to be reliable. Look, numerous Zoave regiments were organized from soldiers of the United States of America who adopted the name and the North American inspired uniforms during the American Civil War. The Union Army had more than 70 volunteer Zoave regiments throughout the conflict, while the Confederates fielded about 25 Zoave companies. So there were Zoave regiments created that were on both sides of the war, the Civil War. So the ancestor isn't talking out the side of his neck when he say, hey, I remember when the Zoaves came from Georgia to Wilmington and all of the officers were women. He's not lying. He's not lying. So even with the interviewer trying to make that note, oh, I haven't been able to corroborate this information. Well, lady, ma'am, sir, whoever you are, we don't need you to corroborate it. We're not looking for your approval of the historical relevancy of what our ancestors had to say. He told us. You know, what difference is it from him telling us than you telling us? We believe the ancestor. And when we look into history, we see that there were, in fact, Zoave regiments running around America in the Civil War. So kill that noise. Kill that noise. We believe the ancestor. Next. We believe the ancestor. We don't believe you. So he says, I remember when the Zoaves company came from Georgia, hit Wilmington, and they had all ladies as officers. So we know that that's correct. He goes on to say, I remember when the Confederates captured part of the Union Army at Fort Sumter, South Carolina, and they brought them here to Wilmington and put them out under 4th Street Bridge. And the white ladies of Wilmington, North Carolina, cooked food and carried it by baskets full to them. Now he's just giving more information about what he remembered. We all had plenty of food, a warehouse full of everything down there by the river, now Red Cross Street, and none of us ever went hungry till the war was over. He says, I remember when General Grant, one of the major names of the American Civil War, I remember when General Grant's army came to the river. They mounted guns to bombard the city, Mr. John Dawson and Mr. Silas Martin, they went up on the corner of 2nd and Nunn Streets on the top of Ben Berry's house and run up a white sheet for a flag. They were surrendering, and the Yankees didn't bombard us. And Mr. Martin gave his house up to the Progro Marshals, and my mother cleaned up the house and washed for them. Her name was Carolyn West. He's basically saying that he was there in the middle of the Civil War when the Union Army came to Wilmington, North Carolina, and they surrendered. Look, I remember when that provost marshal told the colored people that any house in Wilmington they liked, that was empty, they could go take it. And the first one they took was the fine Bellamy Mansion on Market and 5th Street. Now, the Bellamy Mansion, you probably don't remember, but that was mentioned in an article that I read at the beginning of this video. So the Bellamy Mansion, what is he talking about here? Now, again, this is all in part with reclaiming history, because the Bellamy Mansion, let me pull up a good view. This Bellamy Mansion was built by our ancestors as well. Let me zoom in a little bit. This Bellamy Mansion was built by our ancestors as well. Now, this is one of the major plantations in the historic districts. Look, Bellamy Mansion Museum, open for tours. It's now a museum. It's open for tours. You can go through it. They have restored the slave quarters, and basically you can go through it and, check it out. But look, the Bellamy Mansion, built between 1859 and 1861, is a mixture of neoclassical architectural styles, including Greek Revival and Italianate, and is located at 503 Market Street in the heart of downtown Wilmington, North Carolina. It is one of North Carolina's finest examples of historic antebellum architecture. It is a contributing building in the Wilmington Historic District. Okay, look, check this out. Hold on, where it's at? I'm gonna show you guys something. I think I got it pulled up. Maybe not. Yeah, I think it was in this article. Let's scroll down a little bit. Right here. The Bellamy Mansion Museum at Market Street and North 5th Avenue has dealt directly with this history for more than 20 years. Not only did the museum restore its former slave quarters years ago as a way of telling the stories of enslaved people, but the first paragraph of the museum's website about Dr. John Dillard Bellamy, who moved his family into the house in 1860, mentions that he was one of the largest slaveholders in the state of North Carolina. Bellamy had 115 slaves working for him in 3 counties, including 9 at the mansion itself. Look, right here. The Bellamy Mansion was designed by James F. Post, an architect who designed many local buildings, including City Hall, Thalian Hall. Building the Bellamy House, however, was done mostly by enslaved and free blacks. Elvin Ortiz, the foreman on the project, was free, but carpenters David Sagwar and his son Frederick were enslaved. Henry Taylor was a free black carpenter who worked on the house, while William B. Gould, I was an enslaved plasterer. So it even gives the name of some of the enslaved and free blacks who built the renowned Bellamy Mansion. Okay, again, we're talking about reclaiming lost history. The slaves who built Wilmington, North Carolina. They built that place. Now, look, I want to show you guys something. I pulled up this map. I want to show you just how close in proximity a lot of this stuff is. Now, you see in the circle, in fact, let me zoom in. In the circle to the right, if you look into it, it says Bellamy Mansion Museum. That's where the Bellamy plantation is, the Bellamy house that our ancestors built. Now, in the top left circle, where it's circle, you see Chestnut Street, Princess Street, 102 North, blah, 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 recently viewed. This is the area where City Hall is at. Now, below that, where you see the red location indicator, the bottom left circle, that's where that church is at. St. James Church that our ancestor talked about. Now, remember, the ancestor said that he was born in the yard right next to City Hall. So if City Hall is right here, then right here also is where the ancestors' plantation was at. So it's all virtually close to each other, the stuff that he's talking about. This is how you know. He's like, he grew up right here by City Hall, right here by the Bellamy Mansion, and right here by that St. James Church where he said people went to church at. All of that stuff is right next to each other. That's another reason why you know he's like, why would I believe somebody 100 years later trying to tell me what went on in this area when I can read the first-hand account of somebody who grew up here? And so even that Bellamy Mansion, that's preserved to this very day. That's a museum to this very day. Was built by our ancestors, right? It was built by our ancestors. That's just the truth. That's just the truth. I mean, what you want me to say? What you want me to say? You know? There you go, the Bellamy Mansion. Interesting to note that even on the Bellamy Mansion, it had columns. And it's built in kind of like the same structure as that City Hall. They love this Greek architecture, which I want to point out. Sometimes when people hear me talking, I talk about Egypt a lot. I love Egypt. My son's name is Heru, my youngest son. And they'll be like, you're not an Egyptian. Why would you name your son Heru? Why would you talk about Egypt? You're not an Egyptian. Well, Egypt is the major classical African civilization that we can point back to and show our preeminence as a people. And just like right here, the individual will look at this. The Bellamy wasn't Greek. The Bellamy family was not Greek. They had no ties to Greek anything. Dude wasn't a descendant of Alexander the Great. But they understand classical Greek culture, or European culture, classical Greek culture, classical Roman culture, and their architecture, their language, their words. They tie themselves back to the past, although they don't have a genealogical connection. They have no problem linking themselves to that. And I do the same thing with Egypt, right? It's the classical African civilization. So that's the Bellamy house that he's talking about. So again, we're going to see the interviewer try to discredit our ancestor, but we don't believe the interviewer. Look, he says, we all have plenty of food, a warehouse full of everything down there by the river, nigh Red Cross Street, and none of us ever went hungry till the war was over. I remember when General Grant's army, I already read that, where they put up the white sheet and surrendered. Okay, so he says that when the Union Army came in, they told all of the blacks, look, any house that you see that's empty, take it for yourself. The interviewer says, Uncle Jackson, asked the interviewer, don't you remember that house was headquarters of the Federal Army? How could colored people occupy it? Uncle Jackson responds, I don't remember nothing about federal soldiers being in that house, but I'm telling you, I knows a lot of common colored folks was in it because I seen them sitting on the piazza and all up and down those big front steps. I seen them. Nice colored people wouldn't have gone there. They had respect for themselves and their white folks. But Dr. Bellamy came home soon with his family, and those colored people got out. They want their loan. Now, that's true. I looked up the history. The ancestor is correct. What happened was when the Union Army came in, The individuals who were the separatists, who were fighting on behalf of the Confederate Army, they either surrendered or they hightailed it out of town. Bellamy, Dr. Bellamy, who owned the Bellamy plantation, was a separatist. He was a Confederate. He was all for North Carolina seceding from the Union. And he had members of his family and some of his enslaved people fight on behalf of the Confederate Army. So when Wilmington was overtaken by the Union Army, he fled. Him and his entire family fled. They left the Bellamy home abandoned. Now, yes, some of the Union Army, they did spend some time in that house. That's a fact. But they also allowed some of the blacks who the Union Army were freeing to take that house as well, because the Union Army didn't stay there. Eventually, they left. And when they left, the Bellamys were able to come back and take their house again. And when the Bellamy family came back, the colored people who were living there, they left, they scattered. And you see this pattern all throughout the South. I'm explaining to you. What the Union Army would do, they would take a city in the South. They would kill who they had to kill, run off the Confederates that they had to run off. Now, remember, these huge plantations, they were massive homes with so many rooms. And they had jewelry, fine silverware, paintings. They had things that were worth a lot of money. Some of them had livestock. Some of them had horses. Some of them had hogs. Some of them had fields with things that were ready to be harvested. A lot of them, they had smoke houses. Think about it. How can you can't run a plantation if you can't feed your family and your slaves? So how did they feed all of these people? Remember, the Bellamys they owned like damn near more slaves than anybody else in that area, over 100. How can you feed 100 people? And you don't have an HEB, you don't have a Walmart, you don't have a Kroger's, you don't have an Aldi's. How did you feed them? They raised livestock. They raised pigs. They raised the hogs. They raised chickens, right? Then what they would do when they would have these things slaughtered, they would drain the blood, pick the feathers, they would cut them up, they would hang the meat in like the smokehouse, and then they would access the meat when they needed the meat to cook. Simple. And so when the Union Army would take over these southern cities, they were going to these plantations. Why? Because the Union Army, when invading the South, they fed their army by raiding the stock houses, the smoke houses of the major plantations. Some of these major plantations had stables of horses. They would take the horses, and then the Union Army would have more horses. If they were hungry, think about it. If you have enough food to feed your family and 100 slaves for months, when the Union Army comes in, what do you think they're going to eat? They're going to eat this food that you have stored up. They're going to eat it. That's how they survive from going to plantation to plantation. Then, not only that, have you ever heard of the term spoils of war? Listen, regardless of what you think, I don't give a damn how moral you think an army is. When one country invades another, or one army invades the landmass of another, they pillage and plunder. Anything that's not nailed down to the ground that's valuable, they take. They taking it. They taking money. They taking silver. Think about it. If you run into a house and you find silverware that's pure silver, That's money. You find paintings, that's money. Nice clothes, nice shoes, jewelry, that's money. That's money. And the individuals in the Confederate States, they knew that the Union Army was robbing them blind. So on a lot of plantations, when you read these stories, they went out and they buried a lot of their valuables. They buried it. And they were like, whenever we come back after the Union Army leaves, I'm going to come back. I'm going to dig up my stuff so I'm not broke. Some of them died in the Civil War and they never came back to get their riches. That's why I keep telling people there's treasure buried around these plantations. Remember, I'm telling you guys, if ever I get a large sum of money, I'm gonna buy me one. If I can, I'm gonna buy me one of these old plantations, and I'm gonna go on a treasure hunt. One time, it was this guy. He found several tons of gold. He found several tons of gold that was lost during the Civil War that the Confederates were trying to escape with, and that they had to bury. Then they were killed. And they weren't able to go back and get the gold. So a treasure hunter read these stories about this gold. He went on the hunt for the gold. He found the gold buried, right? He contacted the FBI. He contacted the government and was like, hey, I'm a treasure hunter. I found this gold that's been missing for umpteen amount of years. All I want is my finder's fee. You guys can keep the vast majority of the gold, but give me my 10% finder's fee. The FBI, the federal government, was like, okay. They came out in the dead of night. They blocked off the area. They kept him from going out there. They dug in the ground, took the gold, and then told him, oh, we didn't find nothing. And he was like, wait a minute. I have all of this ground penetrating radar that told me that it was tons of gold right here. Y'all came out, y'all dug it up. Where's my finder's fee? The FBI say, we ain't find nothing. We ain't giving you nothing, Nathaniel. And he trying to sue. He took him to court, but it's hard to fight the federal government. It's hard to fight the federal government. He should have just dug it up himself, but they took it. But just like that, if you read these slave narratives, it's treasure buried all over the South. You just got to find out where the plantations were at and find out where that plantation owner hid his treasure, and, you might get lucky. So the ancestor is correct. And the interviewer is slightly correct. Yes, the Union Army occupied the Bellamy Mansion because they occupied every plantation. And they pillaged and plundered every plantation. And then they moved on. And when they moved on, the colored population, the Negroes, the blacks, they, it's called squatting, what we call squatting today. They just moved into the mansion. The Bellamy family went there. And so at the end of the Civil War, the Bellamy family comes back. And when the Bellamy family comes back, all of the colored people that are living there, they got kicked back out. They got kicked back out. So he's right again. Look, he says, enduring the slavery, I toted water for the family to drink. And see, he toted water because he was young. He was born in 1851. The Civil War kicked off in 1861. He would have been about 10 years old. So he gained his freedom at around 15 years old, give or take, if he was correct about the year he was born. 14 to 16 years old, he gained his freedom. So during slavery, that's what he would have did. He would have toted water. He would have worked for the family. He would have worked in the house. Or if there was individuals in the fields, he would have toted water back and forth to the fields. He says, I remember when there were springs under where the new courthouse is now, and all the white folks living around there drank water from those springs. There wasn't running water back then, right? So you had to find underground springs and dig a well. That's what he's talking about. And so they had certain springs that the white folks got their water from and that the colored folk got their water from. They called it Jacob Spring. Now I want to show you something interesting about that. He's saying that there was a spring called Jacob Spring, but there has recently been some tunnels found. They guess what they call it? Jacob's tunnels. So this name of Jacob with associated with something being underground. They haven't necessarily found Jacob's springs, but watch this. Hold on, give me a second. I'm gonna pull this up. Y'all gotta see this. Cause like I say, people think that the ancestors just be talking. Hold on, let me Google it. Give me a second. Jacob. See, they don't understand the level of research I be doing. Wilmington. Look, I spelled all that wrong, but good thing about Google, they'll understand. Let's go to Wilmington Star News. Let's see what this one say. From smuggling to sewers, the legend of this downtown Wilmington tunnel lives on. Look, when it comes to Jacob's Run, Wilmington is like the character Fox Mulder from Supernatural 90s TV show The X-Files. We want to believe that the bricked-in tunnels beneath the streets of downtown Wilmington, whose origins likely date to before the American Revolution, were used as escape routes to freedom by enslaved black people or imprisoned patriots, or served as channels for pirates and criminals to smuggle their ill-gotten goods. Perhaps young lovers once met down there to conduct clandestine affairs. We want to believe. Unfortunately, at least for the romantics among us, pretty much every credible source and nearly every shred of evidence points to a much less glamorous conclusion that the winding tunnels that make up Jacob's Run led to the Cape Fear River because it formed part of early Wilmington sewer and drainage system. Now, Let me see if I'm back. Am I back? Hello, testing. Let me see if I'm back. Okay. Hello. Damn, yeah. Sorry about that. Got kicked off. It still don't look right because I don't see my avatar. Damn, yeah. Sorry about that. Got kicked off. That's crazy. I apologize. I apologize about that. I'm gonna see if I can get my screen share back up. See if I can get it back working. I'm trying to do the screen share right now. Seeing if it's gonna work, but look like we have some technical difficulties. Damn, man, I'm sharing my screen, but I don't even see it. I don't know what happened. Hold on. I really apologize. I'm trying to. Look like I got kicked off and it's not showing. I hope it didn't do this because of the video I played earlier. Man, I see y'all can hear me, but you can't see anything. I'm gonna try to share the screen one more time, see if I can get this back going. Okay. Look like we back. Sorry about that, family. I don't even know how long it was out. Okay, I don't know how long it was out. Looked like a lot of people dropped off. Probably thought it was over. But dang, man. It is what it is. I'm gonna just finish the video now. And whenever everybody come back in, y'all will be able to finish this later. But the ancestor, Uncle Jackson, goes on to say, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I remember when they didn't have no trestles cross either river, and they had a passage boat by the name of Walker Moore, and the wharf was up there by the Charlotte Railroad. The boat would take you from there to the bluff, and then you would have to catch the train to go to Greensboro and other places in North Carolina. I remember when the 4th Street Fire Department bell was in front of the City Hall, and Mr. McGinney had his school right back of City Hall. I believe we was all happy as slaves because we had the best of care. I don't believe none of us was sold off because I never heard tell of it. I have always served nice folks and never associated with any other kind. I brought up Miss Somebody's children, and now she gives me a life interest in this place I lives in. I haven't never to say really wanted for anything. I haven't never bothered with women and had nothing to bother me. So he doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have children. I must tell you about Governor Dudley's election and the free issue niggas. They say Mr. Dudley told them if they vote for him, he'd do more for them than any man ever had. So they voted for him and he was elected. Then he ups and calls a constitutional convention in Raleigh and had all the voting taken away from him. And that's the big thing he done for him. So as we wrap this up, I'm going to talk about this one last thing, and then we're going to end this video. He's talking about a guy named Governor Dudley. And he's saying that Governor Dudley had all of the free blacks to vote for him. And then he had their voting right taken away from him after he got into office. And that goes back to what I was saying about reclaiming our history. Again, a lot of us, even myself included, believe, I believed at one point that our ancestors couldn't vote until 1960 with the Voters' Rights Act and Martin Luther King Jr. and all of those marches, et cetera, et cetera. But our people were voting before the Civil War. Truth be told. Truth be told. And so the ancestor is alluding to that. Now check this out. Now, when he's talking about the Constitutional Convention in Raleigh, and he's talking about Governor Dudley, first let me show you who Governor Dudley is. This is Governor Dudley, Edward Bishop Dudley. Now, he was the 28th governor of the U.S. state of North Carolina from 1836 to 1841. And he served in the United States House of Representatives as a Jacksonian from 1829 to 1831. Now, he won his election due to some of the free blacks who elected him. And so what the ancestor is saying is that after this guy, Edward Bishop Dudley, became the governor of North Carolina, he went to a convention that was held in Raleigh, North Carolina, and got the vote of the free blacks stripped away from them. We call that disenfranchisement. Now, what he's talking about is this. Look, the Constitution of 1835. Let's start right here. The constitutional revisions of 1835 resulted in great part from North Carolina's acceptance of Jacksonian democracy, a political movement that emphasized participation of the common man in the political process. The Democratic movement gained momentum after Andrew Jackson was elected to the presidency in 1828. There had been years of protest against the Constitution of 1776 with its disproportionate representation of eastern counties, extensive property requirements for voting and office holding, and its omission of an amendment and an impeachment process. Now, when a lot of us think about the Constitution of the United States, you will hear in a lot of circles where people will say, especially Black Americans, they'll say that, well, according to the Constitution, we're 3/5 of a human. We're 3/5 of a human. When it says that all men are created equal, it's not talking about us. But actually, according to that Constitution of 1776, free blacks could vote. They had rights. But there was still a slave class. Yes, that cannot be disputed. But free blacks had rights. And so what the ancestor is alluding to is that this Constitutional Convention of 1835 stripped the rights from those free blacks who had voted for Governor Dudley. So I don't want to read through all of this. We're just going to go down and we're going to look at the pertinent parts to prove, excuse me, excuse me. Excuse me, to prove what the ancestor is saying is true. Look, let's go right here where it says sweeping changes. Now, at this Constitutional Convention, it says sweeping changes were adopted. Borough or individual town representation was abolished. Biennial sessions of the legislature were instituted. The governorship was changed to a 2-year elective office. The poll tax or head tax was equalized. The word Protestant was changed to Christian in Article 32 of the old Constitution. Now watch this. The free black vote was eliminated. I'm going to say that one more time. The free black vote was eliminated. That's what the ancestors is referring to, because individuals that was black and were free were able to vote. They were able to vote according to the Constitution of 1776. Now, in 1835, in this Constitutional Convention, they took that right away from the blacks who were free. Look, it goes on to say right here, the Convention of 1835 instituted another change. Until that year, free persons of color could vote in North Carolina if they met property requirements. The African American vote in the state and the Indian vote in Robeson County were ultimately eliminated by an amazingly close vote of 66 to 61. Approximately 48% of Whigs and 45% of Democrats voted against black disenfranchisement. So what they're talking about when they're talking about disenfranchisement is an individual trying to prevent a segment of the population from being able to vote and being able to have their voices heard. And so this was like the first step into stamping out all of the contributions that our ancestors made in Wilmington, North Carolina. Okay, although they had built it from the ground up, although they were skilled artisans, although they were the majority of the population, they stripped them of their right to vote, and they ended up having to fight to get their right to vote back. Now, the ancestor, that is what he's talking about right here. Well, he says, I must tell you about Governor Dudley's election. And the free issue niggas, they say Mr. Dudley told them if they'd vote for him, he'd do more for them than any man ever had. So they voted for him. He was elected. Then he ups and calls a constitutional convention in Raleigh and had all the voting taken away from him. And that's the big thing he done for him. So all of this led up to Wilmington, North Carolina being a major hub of African Americans before the Civil War, during the Civil War, and after the Civil War. After the Civil War, African Americans thrived. They were the majority population. They had banks. They had hospitals. They were doctors. They were teachers. They had schools. They were tradesmen. They were pipe layers. They were bricklayers. They were artisans. They were carpenters. They were blacksmiths. They did everything. And more of the population were being raised out of poverty into the middle class, and from the middle class into the upper class. And unfortunately, during what we call the Reconstruction era, the racist white supremacists couldn't stand the idea of having an equal playing field between the white population and the black population. And so they armed themselves. They got guns and ammunition, and they went into Wilmington, North Carolina. They killed people. They lynched people. They burned down businesses. They forced politicians to resign. They the only black-owned newspaper in the country, they burned it down. The individuals that ran it, they ran them out of town, and they successfully did a political coup d'etat. How right now, when we look at some places in like West Africa, we say, oh, the military, they did a coup d'etat in Mali or Burkina Faso, and they took over from the duly elected officials. Well, that has happened over and over and over and over and over again in American history. And it also happened in Wilmington. No one was ever arrested for the murders. No one was ever punished for the murders. And they went back to acting like it never even happened. And one can only imagine what Wilmington, North Carolina would look like today if that political coup never took place. So this has been Reclaiming Lost History, the slaves who built Wilmington, North Carolina. We have been looking at the historical record, and we have been looking at the historical record of our ancestor, Uncle Jackson. As always, I hope you guys have heard something that you never heard before. I hope I've said some things that are very interesting, that things that make you think. And I hope how I was kicked out, I hope that doesn't I hope that really doesn't affect the video quality. I really do hope that y'all can hear the rest of it. But I've been on for a little over 2.5 hours, so I'm about to tap out. Thank you guys for tapping in. Thank you guys for watching. May your name live on forever, and may your memory never die. Hotel, I'm out.